Again, thank you for being here. I want to start off by introducing our Executive Director, Katie Fahey. She founded and led Voters Not Politicians, the grassroots nonpartisan campaign that ran a successful effort to end gerrymandering in the state of Michigan by amending the state constitution in 2018 with a 61% of the votes. Now Katie is the Executive Director of The People, a nonpartisan nonprofit organization committed to sharing the lessons learned in Michigan with voters across the ideological spectrum in all 50 states. We also are bridging the political divide, supporting nonpartisan good government reform nationwide. The People gathers and empowers everyday Americans to find common ground and to take action together to create a more responsive government of, by, and for the people. So without further ado, Katie Fahey.
Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for being here today. 2021 is going to be a big year for line drawing, a year where when redistricting happens, it will determine the next 10 years and decade worth of elections. We had a wave of reforms last cycle in 2018, some of which we have on the phone right now, including myself from Michigan and Sean from Missouri. And we've seen over the last year the growing concern from millions of Americans wanting to have a fair redistricting process. Over 7 campaigns were launched this year to try and end redistricting at the ballot box by trying to create some form of either independent or bipartisan commission. And unfortunately, we are down to 1 now and 2 attempts from 2 different legislatures to try and make the process actually more partisan, which is why the urgency is here today. When we started talking about redistricting in 2016, the amount of pushback was incredible. People said that regular citizens wouldn't care about this, that redistricting was too complicated. Yet in Michigan, as well as in other states across the country, we saw thousands of people and ultimately millions of people wanting to vote for these reforms, which makes it so critical that these successes at the ballot box, either voting yes in Virginia or no in Missouri or New Jersey, are really critical for being able to help set the tone of what will continue to be possible across the country. And that's why we wanted to bring everybody here today so that we could hear from that and also look at that national perspective and why this is so important. In Virginia, there's a pathway where a legislature and the citizens can work together. One of the really exciting things is that if this passes, it will be an example of a bipartisan legislature writing language, putting it to the citizens, and then the citizens deciding how they want maps to be drawn. In Missouri, we saw in 2018 the citizens send a very strong mandate saying how they wanted the lines to be drawn, and yet we see that the legislature has now decided they know better and trying to make an attempt to actually make partisan gerrymandering worse once again. And in New Jersey, I think it's also really important because we see a legislature that is trying to basically say that every time you're in power, you're allowed to change the rules to try and entrench that power for decades more to come, setting an extreme precedent. So these campaigns have had to go through so many changes, just like all of us in 2020, from COVID to needing to figure out how to gather signatures sometimes or how to navigate court challenges during this. We're very excited that these 3 campaigns are still well off of the ground. So we're going to turn our attention first to Virginia. We have Bobby Vassar here. He's the co-chair of the board for the Fair Maps Virginia initiative. And Bobby, we'll let you take it away.
One second, Bobby. There you go.
Thanks. I had a little issue there, but thank you. And first I want to thank you, Katie, for your leadership and all of your work, including your inspiring work in Michigan with Voters Not Politicians, leading the fight there. And now in your work with the People, helping to promote gerrymandering, elimination, redistricting reform. we're very proud and pleased in Virginia, quite frankly, to be working on a positive side of the redistricting reform movement, in that we're working to pass a constitutional amendment. We've passed it, had it passed through 2 successive legislative sessions, which is required in Virginia for a constitutional amendment, and we're proud of the fact that it passed in one session that was controlled by Republicans, and the other that was controlled by Democrats. So now we go to the voters for their confirmation of that. So we're very hopeful and working hard, not only to positively get the amendment passed, but also to set the precedent of having in this region, the South, a redistricting reform initiative put into law. In terms of our amendment, we think it's a good amendment. It is bipartisan, transparent in that it requires that all activities be in the open, as opposed to the past backroom deals that are cut in secrecy. Fair in that we're equally bipartisan, both in the appointment of legislators and in the citizen appointment. And it's fair because we have an equal number of legislators, House and Senate members, and citizens, 8 legislators, 8 citizens. We're also proud that for the first time we have in our amendment to be installed in the Virginia Constitution a measure that will ensure racial and ethnic minority communities are treated fairly. We've had over the past decades, including up until the most recent redistricting process, racial as well as political or partisan gerrymandering. So we see this as a once in a lifetime effort, because passing 2 legislators where all the different proposals were considered, and this amendment passing is now the chance to put this into law and to have genuine reform in Virginia. If it passes, it will not only end partisan gerrymandering, but it will make racial gerrymandering illegal under the Constitution, as I mentioned, and it will get rid of the proverbial backroom aspect of the party in control, protecting incumbents and the party status. We have a number of very prominent officials who have indicated their backing for the amendment, including both of our senators, Senator Tim Kaine, our U.S. senators, and Senator Mark Warner, who has recently announced that he voted early and voted for the amendment. So we're pleased to have this initiative, and we're working hard to get it passed.
Thank you, Bobby, so much. I think so many people are very skeptical that both Democrats and Republicans could continue to pass something and work together and get it to the voters, and we're excited it has. And now we'll be going over to Sean Nicholson in Missouri, where we see what many, I think, would say is a power grab from the legislature to try and undo the will of the voters. So Sean, can you give us an update from Missouri?
All right, thanks so much, Katie. So as Katie mentioned, we were also doing a proactive nonpartisan redistricting reform campaign back in 2018. When I got started with this, I didn't know anybody cared. We just thought, there's got to be a better way than a system that just works for politicians who are scared of their voters. And so we worked really hard in 2017 and 2018 to qualify and pass our measure. It was called the Clean Missouri Amendment. It passed by an almost 2-to-1 margin. Very similar margins to what voters passed the Michigan reforms on. And we saw literally the day before polls, not after, like not before polls closed, but before polls opened, there was talk and there was chatter from some of the lobbyists and political types in Jefferson City about, hey, what are we going to do to undo what voters are about to pass? And what they put forward in the form of Amendment 3 that voters are casting ballots on right now is not just a repeal of what voters did in Missouri, but it would replace all of the good reforms with rules and a system unlike anything Missouri has ever seen and unlike anything else in the United States. I think of particular interest to some of the other states and into the national reform community. What Amendment 3 would do is create a system that is, once again, secretive, where maps get drawn in the back rooms, a system that's more partisan than ever. So while there's been movement across the country for a more independent process, they want to give the state political parties in Missouri new powers to pick map drawers that they've never had in the past. They want to change the population base. They want to make Missouri the first state that draws maps based on the number of eligible voters in the state, rather than the total population, which is what every state does now, sometimes called citizen voting age population maps. The sponsors, the backers of Amendment 3 have been very clear that that is their goal. That would be wrong on its face to not count everyone. Missouri has counted everyone since at least 1875. The data show that it would also be discriminatory in its impact and disproportionately impact communities of color. The deal on the table, essentially what they want to do is not count 1 in 5 white Missourians, and then not count 1 in 4 Black Missourians, not count half of the Latino and Asian American populations in the state, just because communities of color happen to be relatively younger. My son, who's upstairs, supposed to be doing virtual school right now, he would not count in these maps, but he would vote in these maps if this comes to pass. Just a profoundly unfair and undemocratic system, and that is a big reason why the coalition that is working to defeat Amendment 3 in Missouri is bigger than the coalition that passed the Clean Missouri Amendment in the last election. We have a very large coalition of Republicans, Democrats, independents, non-traditional allies with business, community, faith, civil rights groups all coming together to say, A, we should listen to what voters did. It was good policy. It was well vetted. It passed overwhelmingly. And we should certainly not become we should not be moving the state backwards. We should not be passing the most extreme gerrymandering plan in the United States. So very excited to be a part of this conversation, to shine a light on the campaign that's happening here. And we are 3 weeks out from delivering another mandate for fair maps in Missouri. It was a big vote yes win a couple years ago, and then here in a couple weeks, it's going to be a big vote no.
Thank you, Sean. The campaign director of Clean Missouri, the Vote No campaign for Amendment 3 in Missouri. And next, I'd like to send us over to the other part of the country, back to the East Coast in New Jersey. We have Jessie Burns, who's the executive director of the League of Women Voters of New Jersey and Fair Districts, New Jersey. Jessie.
So much for inviting me for this important conversation. I'm happy to be here. So the League of Women Voters of New Jersey and the Fair Districts New Jersey coalition that we run, we're urging New Jersey voters to vote no on our statewide ballot question number 3. So this question is a little bit different. And what it's doing, it's postponing redistricting for 2 years during any cycle in which New Jersey does not receive census data by February 15th. So while it's said to be in response to the pandemic's possible impact on the census timeline, we're arguing that the proposal goes too far and it would be permanent. So this change is going to impact redistricting for decades to come, even after we're no longer grappling with the impacts of COVID-19. So as I said, this permanent change is really a permanent change to a one-time problem that's going to be triggered every time New Jersey receives census data later than February 15th. Normally, the Census Bureau has until April 1st to deliver the data. And as a courtesy, they deliver it early to New Jersey and Virginia because we hold off-year legislative elections. However, they're under no obligation to do so. And in fact, they don't always do that. So in 2001, we received our data in March, and we were able to carry out our redistricting process under the usual time frame by moving our primary election. I think what's particularly troubling about this question is that it dilutes the power of New Jersey's diverse communities. So we're significantly more diverse now than we were 10 years ago when the current map was drawn. So this question will continue to use that map for an additional 2 years, but New Jersey's Latinx and Asian populations have grown by over 20%. And delaying redistricting denies communities of color fair representation for 2 years. And then I think finally, the question completely disregards the need for meaningful reform and the process. It's unfortunate that New Jersey continues to attempt to make harmful changes to our redistricting process while ignoring these calls for reform. Fair Districts has been working for years to advocate for a process that better serves the residents of our state, that's inclusive, transparent, community-driven, much like much of the reforms that you were talking about, Kay, that we've seen kind of take hold across the country. New Jersey just resists any kind of these positive changes. And instead, over and over, New Jersey's attempts to manipulate the redistricting process has sent a clear message to the public that the redistricting process is one to be gamed by elected officials and party operatives, and that the public has no meaningful place in the process. So for Bobby's, back rooms, smoke-filled back rooms, that's exactly how New Jersey is operating. And I think that the message being sent by this ballot question number 3, a proposal for unnecessary permanent changes to our Constitution that dilute political power and representation for communities of color while doing nothing to improve our redistricting process is absolutely no different. So I think that, the redistricting status quo in New Jersey is not only inadequate, but it's harmful, and process improvements are definitely needed now more than ever. So we're urging voters to vote no on question 3.
Thank you, Jesse. And we also have with us author David Daly. He's covered redistricting, especially the 2010 redistricting cycle, in a book called Rat Fucked extensively. He has a new book out as well, kind of talking about how citizens are fighting back against this, and also is helping us pay attention and figure out, even beyond these 3 states, what else is happening, because there's key races on the ballot for 2020 as well, which will help determine the maps across the country. David?
Thank you, Katie. Thank you, everybody. Pleasure to be with you all today. We have these 3 really important initiatives that are on the ballot this fall, but I mean, every state is going to have the opportunity to affect redistricting. The next decade of our politics really is on the ballot in this election. The partisan gerrymanders that were drawn this last decade were not only more extreme than any other time in our modern history, but they've been longer lasting as well. Here we are in 2020, at the end of this cycle, more than 50 million Americans, that's almost 1 in 6 of us, live in a state in which one or both chambers of the state legislature has been drawn, is controlled by the party that won fewer votes in the 2018 election. Partisan gerrymandering is cheating. It's also one of the most insidious forms of voter suppression that there is. It dilutes the votes of voters at the local and the national level. It warps the nature of representation. It insulates politicians from the people. And it does all this while masking itself as politics as usual, or just the spoils of victory. The voters are outraged by this. You see it in the polls. You see it in the 5 states that enacted reform in 2018. These were red states, bluish states, purplish states. We all hate gerrymandering. People have their work cut out for them, as we have seen. We've not only been abandoned really by the federal courts on this issue, but we've seen that the initiative process has been made more difficult by COVID, but also by politicians on both sides of the aisle, whether in legislatures or in the courts, who've worked to undermine the bipartisan will of the people. We saw Democrats up to this in Oregon and Nevada, Republicans in Arkansas and North Dakota. There is the opportunity here for voters to send another message in Missouri and in New Jersey that we are watching, but also in Virginia, where there is the opportunity for real bipartisan reform via the legislative process that shows a road forward even in states that don't have an initiative process. It's an opportunity for Democrats to model reform and to show that a confident party embraces fair maps. There's a number of other key states this year, Texas, where 9 seats in the state house could determine seats at the table for redistricting in the next decade. North Carolina, where 5 seats in the state Senate and 6 seats in the state house could be crucial to determining who controls the process there. There's also down ballot races that could be almost more unsung in this. Democrats looking for a trifecta control of the process in Minnesota, Republicans in Wisconsin and in Kansas looking to gain supermajority veto power over maps that could be otherwise knocked out by Democratic governors. So we'll be watching as census data arrives. We'll be watching to see how that impacts states with 2021 elections. We'll be watching what Republicans do in Kentucky and Oklahoma, how Democrats draw a line in the states where they're likely to have complete control, Maryland, Oregon, Illinois, watching to see how the new processes in Michigan and Ohio work, watching to see what kind of action Congress takes after this election. These initiatives really are crucial. If voters demand reform, if voters defend the reforms that they've won, they insist that politicians of both parties live up to the reforms that they've campaigned on. It sends an important message to officials in every state on the verge of this next redistricting cycle that map making cannot happen in back offices, in bunkers, in map rooms. They must be drawn in public with full transparency, that these maps are the building blocks of our democracy and that they belong to us. Thank you.
Thank you, David. And we'll be opening it up to the press for questions in a second. As a reminder, we'll just need you to unmute your microphone and then we'll call on the order that people unmute. But, you know, in Michigan, it has been amazing to see now that we do have a process in place where the citizens are at the center of it. Even amongst a pandemic, there were nearly 10,000 people who applied to be on this commission. And now that the commission has been meeting, they're taking feedback from across the state. They're a true representation of the people. And all of them, if you listen to their testimony, which is live on the Secretary of State's website, talk about how they felt like it was their civic duty, and like with the state of politics and where it is at right now, that they just wanted to help ensure their fellow Michiganders that a process could be done fairly, that they could be listened to for once. And so there is hope out there, I hope. At least in Michigan, we're seeing a great response so far. But I think what's really critical in Virginia, New Jersey, and Missouri is being able to continue that on, being able to show voters that even when things feel extremely partisan in a presidential year election, that the majority of Americans just want a process where every vote counts, where you're not discriminated on because of the party or the person that you vote for. You are treated like you have power with your one person, one vote. And that's what I think is at the basis of what all of these campaigns are fighting for, is how do we make sure the will of the American people is what's actually being followed in each state. All right, so would love to take questions now. All right. Oh, I might have to help unmute. Thanks. Walt, I see. All right.
Not unmuted. Thank you.
Yeah.
Echoing the old Bernstein, Woodward mantra, follow the money. Question for all 3 states, maybe for Mr. Daly as well, and that is, who's funding the opposition? Where are you getting your heat? Maybe start with Mr. Vassar.
There we go. Yes, we're not certain. Our opposition, Fair Districts, I guess, is the leading entity in Virginia, Fair Districts, Virginia, that suggests it's out there raising money and what have you, but they didn't report any at the last reporting period. So we're not sure. I've received, and I'm sure others have, a solicitation letter from one of the members of the legislature who is with the opposition group, and it solicited funds along with a lot of grossly inaccurate characterizations of the amendment, but we don't know what their money situation is unless Brian has received some more information. I've seen nothing to suggest that they are being funded by anyone, though they certainly seem to be spending some money. But that's all I am able to report about them.
Sean, would you like to go next?
Yeah, so Amendment 3 has largely been driven by members of the General Assembly. It's been a subset of the majority there. I will say, though, that there's been actual bipartisan opposition in the Senate, in the House, and then with voters. So yeah, I think one of the things we've actually seen in Missouri in the last few weeks is that there hasn't been a lot of aggressive vote yes campaigning. My theory on that is that a lot of the details that are in the fine print are pretty indefensible. But, you know, we are prepared and definitely paying attention to some late money getting spent. And, you know, we're running an aggressive campaign on the assumption that that is going to come.
Thank you. And Jesse.
Yeah, so I think that we're in a similar situation where we're not seeing a significant vote yes public campaign, and I think that's for a number of reasons. The measure was pushed by our Democratic leadership legislature, and then I think that once it was put onto the ballot, they are kind of thinking that most voters will just instinctively vote yes on it. We have two other questions that have a lot of public support. So this is the third question, which, you know, I don't think that they have to put up much of a dollar campaign in order for voters to not really have a good understanding of what this question is going to do. And we haven't seen a lot of public finance pushback publicly. You know what I mean? Money that we can see publicly that's being pushed back as a vote yes on this.
Any other questions? Oh, yep. Well,
Somebody wants to jump in. A question for Ms. Burns regarding your dates. I was curious as to why was it so critical for the legislature to move the date up? What's their rationale for moving the date up? Do they really feel that it's impossible to do the maps in time if they stick with the old deadline?
oh,
Sorry
Jesse,
about
thank
that. I
you.
clicked the wrong thing. Yeah, so there was two pieces of this where we could not get any transparent reasoning on why February 15th, why so early, and why permanent. We haven't gotten clear answers to either of those questions, and I think that might tell you something about what are they trying to kind of hide there. They have gotten the data later than February 15th in the past in New Jersey, and redistrict under the same kind of time frame. So it is possible to move the primary election depending on when you get the census data. If you receive it, you know, April or even May, you can have a late primary election. So they have not been transparent about why this date and why permanent when neither of those is necessary.
Thank you. I have a question from the chat. This is for Virginia. What are the minority protections in the amendment itself to guard against future racial gerrymandering in Virginia?
Yes, there is a provision in the Constitution amendment that requires the application of the Federal Equal Protection and Voting Rights Act provisions, as well as the court cases that have interpreted them. And in addition to that, so if the Voting Rights Act goes away or Supreme Court precedent changes, we'll have an independent provision that requires, where practical, and that is where there's a significant enough concentration of ethnic and racial minorities, they must be given the opportunity to elect candidates of choice. And so it's a provision that will require, under Virginia law, regardless of what the federal status is, that minority representation be included in any redistricting process, such that it not only prevents the problem of packing, where legislators have racially packed minorities into as fewer districts, both to protect incumbents and to diminish their impact on surrounding districts. And so that can't be done without consequence now. And it also ensures that where there are minority communities of interest, because in addition to the provision for racial and ethnic minorities, communities of interest, neighborhoods, and other definable communities are to be protected in the line drawing processes.
Thank you. This is a question for everybody, but in 2020, with these amendments, all three being proposed by the legislature to some extent, are you guys seeing that voters know about them, and what are you hearing from voters? And anybody who wants to go first, we'll just go in that order. Yeah, Sean.
Yeah, so Amendment 3 was drafted in a way it's designed to trick voters. And so we've been running an aggressive campaign so that voters understand how the politicians behind it are trying to dupe them. Two courts ruled at this point that what the legislature tried to put on the ballot to describe Amendment 3 broke the law with its dishonesty. How the legislature hopes to dupe folks beyond the ballot language is they want to change the lobbyist gift limits for the state by $5 and contribution limits for state Senate candidates by $100. Everything else in the measure is about gerrymandering, but that's their theory of how they can get voters to approve this incumbent protection scheme. So, you know, we're out there, they're running a campaign to make sure people understand how the politicians are trying to trick them and feel really good about how that's going.
Great. Bobby or Jesse, what about in Virginia or New Jersey?
Yeah, well, we don't have anything official, but I've certainly been heartened by the indications we're getting. You know, just even from a personal standpoint, I've sent out lots of stuff on Facebook and other email and what have you, and learning that people either intend to or have already voted. And when we get such great signals as a U.S. Senator who's on the ballot this time, who is willing to strongly identify himself with a positive side of the amendment by saying he voted for it, despite, you know, the difficulties we've had with the Democratic Party and certain of its officials indicating their concerns about it. So those are all positive signs that we're getting, and so we hope that that continues. We're not going to take anything for granted, so we're getting ready to unleash all we can to help voters understand why this is important and what we expect it to mean. So we're hopeful, but working hard, not taking anything for granted.
Jesse?
So to be clear, your question was regarding the legislature's timeline putting this on the ballot, correct?
How voters are responding to it, if you think that they know about it or don't, because the legislature has put it on themselves.
Yeah, so in New Jersey, I think we've had kind of an interesting process. Basically, our legislature proposed something really flawed in 2016, which was stopped. It did again in 2018, which was really stopped with a lot of fierce opposition. Thanks to, you know, the national groups and everybody state by state kind of working together on redistricting reform, New Jersey voters were much more aware of what the legislature was trying to do. This whole time, redistricting groups have been proposing changes and trying to get them to accept proposals that we're seeing as successful in other states and have been being ignored. Then what happened was around, I guess we knew that the census data was going to be delayed. I would say April, we definitely knew that there was going to be a delay. We continuously tried to contact the legislature saying, can we work together on a proposal to deal with this? And we were ignored. And then in July, this legislature quickly introduced this question, pushed it through in a matter of a couple of weeks, and then it appeared on the ballot. So while we do have much more voter attention to redistricting, thanks again to groups like this and to David Daly's work and all this attention around redistricting, the question, because it's so COVID specific on the ballot, voters don't really know how to do that. So there's not a lot of understanding around this question, and the timeline has been incredibly rushed. And our voters also, you know, New Jersey is an automatic vote by mail state as a result of the COVID pandemic. So voters are receiving ballots in a way that they are not used to viewing, and they're receiving the ballot questions in ways that they're not used to viewing. So we have a lot of challenges on doing, you know, significant voter education around these questions that we're facing.
Thank you. This next question is for Sean from Walt. How is Amendment 3 different than other things we have seen around the country?
So there's three big ways that Amendment 3 is not only unlike anything else Missouri has seen, but unlike anything else in the country. So one, I mentioned at the top, the backers of Amendment 3 want to make Missouri the first state to not count everyone in our maps. The good news is that voters will see when they look at the fiscal note. So in Missouri, there's the plain language summary, and then there's the fiscal note that explains what happens financially if this passes. The undercounting, the not counting of everyone is now reflected in the fiscal note for Amendment 3, where it says that local governments expect significant revenue losses. So I think that's a good thing in terms of informing voters some of the controversial nature of what's in the fine print. The second big way that Amendment 3 is unlike anywhere else in the country is they want to allow explicit allowances for extreme gerrymandering. They want to allow gerrymandering that's using the efficiency gap metric that you know, is way outside the norm and the mainstream of what would be considered fair in any other context. So they want to flip the voter approved rules from saying do the best you can on limiting partisan bias to saying this is how far you can go. And then the third big way that it's different than everywhere else is they want to make it so judges can't throw out a full map plan, even if a judge finds that it's unconstitutional. So they're trying to both rig the process, rig the rules underneath the hood, and then rig the way that you can as a citizen, as a Missourian, be able to go and say, hey, like the outcome here is unfair, and we'd like we need to have it changed. So it's really a trifecta of bad ideas.
Can't hear.
Katie, I think that you're muted.
Can't hear you, Katie.
Sorry. This next question is for Dave Daly specifically. Why do you think Democrats are fighting the Virginia initiative so badly? Haven't they supported measures like this in the past? You see you study examples across the country. And we're probably going to need to unmute you too.
Great.
There we go.
Thank you. It's a great question, and I think that a lot of the moral high ground that Democrats have claimed on redistricting issues is really at stake in this battle in Virginia. I don't think that there is anything too complicated about it. I think that this, you saw that Democrats very much supported this compromise in winter of 2019, the first time it went through the Virginia Assembly. And then after Democrats took over the Assembly and it came up for a second vote, all of a sudden there were questions about whether they wanted to go through with this. And it's pretty clear that after they were elected and after they had trifecta control of a state government, they also won the power to draw the maps next time around. So they began looking at this issue a little bit differently. And what I think is important here is if Democrats were on the level with their opposition, they have complete control of state government in Virginia. They could have in this last session enacted any of the protections, any of the enabling legislation that they claim that they desire. Instead, that didn't happen. So what I think is clear is that this is not only the best compromise that can be reached, this is the best the Democrats could do in Virginia. And if we're going to have a process in Virginia in 2021 in which citizens have any seat at the table, this is the way to do it. If this does not happen, then Democrats will have complete control of the process. And I think that there's many Democrats in Virginia who would like complete control of the process. They would like to perhaps do to Republicans what has been done to Democrats elsewhere in the nation. That is not the right way forward. It's not good politics. It's not the sign of a confident political party. And it is not what many of these Democrats ran on in the first place.
Thank you. All right, I don't know if we have any other questions. If you do, please just unmute, raise your hand, or put it in the chat. We can see all three. All right. I don't believe I see any more. This has been recorded. We will be sending it back out with a press recap. I know that all of the campaigns are busy running towards election day now, and that the country is watching. Millions of Americans right now are losing trust in our government institutions as well as in each other. And I think one of the really great things about redistricting reform, when it can be done in an earnest way, actually trying to just go back to basics and figure out how do we create a fair, a transparent, a process that is deserving of the American people's trust, is that it creates an actual place for us to do that rebuilding, to do that listening that so often is missing, and to get back to the basics of why do we have a democratic republic government? What does it actually mean to have representation? How do we make sure our communities' voices are heard both in our state capitals and in Washington, D.C., not only for this year and this moment, but for the next 10 years. And then in 10 years, how do we make sure that the future generations also can have a fair process that puts them first, that puts their communities and the issues, whatever 2030 is going to be with how crazy 2020 was, how do we make sure that those issues can also be what's actually reflected in this map drawing process instead of just partisan politics trying to manipulate the will of the voters. Thank you once again to Fair Maps Virginia, to Clean Missouri, to the League of Women Voters in New Jersey for getting the word out and for making sure voters have an informed opinion on what will be on their ballot this year. The nation is watching. We're excited and continuing to fight with Fair Maps together. Thank you.